Hello, my name is Jade-Lyn.
Hello, my name is Shanique.
And today, our research topic is on sacred spaces. In simpler terms, how do others find spaces as sacred?
So for the agenda, we'll be talking about the purpose and literature reviews. We use 4 literature reviews to strengthen our arguments: methodology, results, discussion, conclusion, and cited works.
Just for a little introduction on what is a sacred space. A sacred space sets apart from the ordinary, imbued with spiritual significance and often to central religious or cultural practices.
A space can be sacred providing those who inhabit a particular space with a sense of transcendence being connected to something greater than oneself. Aldestein, 2018.
Now, we're going to discuss different types of sacred spaces. So first, we have religious sites such as chapels, churches, temples, synagogues, and mosques. Second, we have public spaces, which are libraries, schools, gym and recreational centers, and many more that consist of being outside. Last we have on the list is closed spaces, which are like homes, dorms, hospitals, and shelters. The different types of sacred spaces are important because they help support the students' either spiritual, emotional, or cultural well-being, as we stated, and this can basically help direct with their mental health and belonging while being a student and attending UMSV. So we, of course, as I said, divided up the sacred spaces, and we found overall that it helps with either the spiritual support, as we said, a sense of identity. Most students will feel seen and respected, and what most important thing about this is how did they find these spaces as sacred with the community of the college/university. The purpose of the study is to explore whether freshmen and senior perceive their dorm as sacred spaces regardless of their religious or non-religious beliefs.
This research is important because it examines potential differences in how these two groups interpret sacredness, considering their religious affiliations and perceptions of campus sacred lives and dorm life.
As mentioned, we came across 4 peer-reviewed articles that basically strengthen our argument, which one is Sacred Space by Pamela, and she emphasized that a space can be sacred, providing those who inhabit a particular space with a sense of transcendence, basically meaning being connected to something greater than oneself. Next, we have Forms and Meanings by Michael Smith, and this Michael Smith emphasized how coordination among urban buildings and spaces and standardization of urban form.
The other 2 sources that were used are Durkheim's theory of religion. A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, things set apart and forbidden. Beliefs and practices which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them. The last source is Sacred Beliefs and Beliefs of Sacredness by Hubert. There may be no other way to recognize a sacred site than by observations of the rules of behavior that pertain to them.
The next literature review we used for our research presentation was The Architecture of Multi-Faithful Spaces by Andrew Crompton, and he basically observed that multi-faith spaces adopt neutral design approach, and this design aimed to avoid favoring one particular faith. And the last one we did was From Chapel to Prayer Room by Sophie Ray, and she emphasized how spaces evolved from traditional Christian chapels to multi-faith prayer rooms. Now, Andrew Crompton and Sophie Ray's readings, it helped show how if you cater to one faith, it will basically affect people, but if you design a space where it's catered to multiple instead of just one, it will avoid favoring one particular faith, which was helpful in this research, as we will go on and further explain. Now, I know you're wondering, how did we get this information? How did we research this? Now we're going into the methodology part, and the first one, how we came up with the participants. How we collected the participants were, we had used Microsoft Forms, which is which was developed by Microsoft that allowed users to create surveys, quizzes, polls, and registration forms easily. And so we basically emailed these forms to freshmen and seniors that we knew or our peers knew of, and they were able to access that said survey, and they completed it. Next, we also formed a research question, which was, how do freshmen and seniors perceive their dorms as sacred spaces? And lastly, we had sampling variables, so it was 5. We wanted to target 5 religious freshmen, 5 non-religious freshmen, 5 religious seniors, and 5 non-religious seniors.
There were four hypotheses. The first hypothesis was that religious seniors would consider the dorm the most sacred because they're able to have personal space. We believe that this hypothesis would be correct because as a senior myself, I tend to be in my dorm the most. I have my friends over. I pray in my dorm. It's a comfort space for me, and something that I find very sacred. It's close to me, especially as someone who has a single dorm. I was even scared to have a roommate because it's so sacred to me, in my personal space. So the next hypothesis is that religious freshmen will consider the library as sacred because they tend to stay focused on completing assignments on time. I believe this because during my freshman year, that was the most, like, I was in my dorm. I had a roommate that, was a stranger to me, so I didn't want to be in my room all the time. I felt more comfortable, being in the library, getting my assignments done, staying there longer than I needed because it felt more familiar to me than a dorm with a stranger.
The third hypothesis is that non-religious freshmen will find the gym as sacred because it's a distress area. And this is a good example because most non-religious people will not find their rooms as sacred, and they will most likely find their gym outside or public spaces more sacred, even if they're non-religious, because that's where they like to either hang out at or just de-stress. The last hypothesis is non-religious seniors will perceive their dorm as a sacred space because it serves as a private, personal well-being space and helps with stress relief.
Speaking from experience, I tend to spend a lot of time in my room, and I notice a lot of people who are seniors tend to spend a lot of time in their rooms because it's closer to graduating. We want that personal space of ours, and whether religious or non-religious, this is something that is very important to seniors.
Now, moving on to the results, as we said, we used the Microsoft Forms to form our survey, and for the first section, we divided up between the freshmen, seniors, residents, and non-residents. And so we're just going to get into it. So as far as the freshmen, there were a total of 11 freshmen and 9 seniors. There were 14 residents and 6 non-residents. And what we found at an overall standpoint was that the freshmen were more willing to complete the survey. So we wanted to take a closer look at the freshmen and seniors and whether they identify as religious or spiritual and their year status. So as you can see, we put it into categories for the freshmen, in which there were 6 freshman students who identify as either spiritual or religious. 5 of them were residents and 1 was a non-resident. And as far as the non-religious, there were 4 freshmen who identify as non-religious. 3 were residents and 1 was a non-resident. Moving on to seniors, there were 6 students who identify as either religious or spiritual. 5 of them were resident and 1 was a non-resident. And in the non-religious group, there was only 1 senior that identified as non-religious. We asked a few questions about the opinion on campus. We found that residents described the campus as positive. Non-residents compared the campus as a community. Next, we asked their favorite place on campus. 17 people had a favorite place, and 3 people did not have a favorite place. With the 17 people who had a favorite place, we found that it was common that these places were outdoor spaces, such as the Merrick Field, which is also known as the soccer field, the little grass area near the castle, and also near Founders. And we found these results show that participants were likely to choose a outdoor space before a indoor space on campus. We even asked, how did they personally define sacred space? Some participants had a clear connection to participants' personal comfort and emotional well-being. We asked, how does this influence your connection to spaces on campus? And we found that many participants felt like spaces on campus didn't really influence their connection. I wanted to ask, what were some of the spaces on campus that made them feel either safe, peaceful, or personally connected. And we found that many participants found outdoor spaces such as before an indoor space. We asked in their daily routine, did they actively seek out quiet or personal spaces, and if so, where did they go? And participants routed their dorms when seeking participants routed their dorm when actively seeking out spaces and for quiet. And there were 2 questions that specifically asked about their dorms. One being, how does your dorm influence your sense of comfort, privacy, and reflection? Participants felt like their dorms provide comfortability and privacy. And we also asked, along with that, do you associate yourself with your dorm with any sense of sacredness, mindfulness, or emotional significance? Why or why not? And participants found their dorm as a sacred space.
So we also tried looking at common behaviors. So for our number 13, the question was, in what ways, if any, do you personalize or ritualize your dorm space to make it feel more like a sanctuary? Common behaviors included decorating with posters, personal items, or photos. Ritual practices included stretching, meditation, affirmations, and music. And 10% of the people did not live in a dorm, or it was not applicable to them. For question 14, the question is, have your feelings about your dorm changed over time? Example, from the start of the semester to now. If so, what influenced this change? So 30% said yes, it changed due to emotional connection, boosted improvement or adjustment, and 45% no change. 45% said no change, consistent feelings or lack of attachment, and 25% was not applicable, did not dorm, or gave no clear opinion. For number 15, the question is, do you believe non-religious spaces such as dorms, libraries, or gyms can be considered sacred? Why or why not? 70% said yes. Dorms, gyms, or libraries can be sacred if they're quiet. 15% no. 15% said no due to noise, lack of religious intent. 15% maybe, and it was conditional depending on the usage, intention, or individual perspective. For question 16, we asked, if you practice a religion, did it influence how you use your dorm or other campuses to worship, prayer, or reflection? No influence. Students said religion didn't affect their dorm use. Some said yes, they used their dorms for prayer, reflection, or study, and some were non-applicable. They skipped or gave ambiguous answers. For question 17, we asked about the use of alternative relaxation spaces. 45% said yes, gyms, parks, cafes, and nature for mindfulness. No or rarely were 40%, either no need or no habit of seeking these spaces. 15% were non-applicable, religious students, or unengaged responses. For question 18, it was comparing dorm sacredness to traditional religious spaces. So 40% said both are valid in different ways. 35% preferred religious spaces. 25% preferred dorms because they offer more privacy and freedom. Question 19 was about the most meaningful campus space outside of their dorm. Popular answers included the auditorium, church, statues, nature spots. Some common themes were connection, routine, solitude, and memory. For question 20, it was about barriers to peace in dorms. Top 3 issues were 40% chose noise as one of the issues. 25% said other people. 15% said identity/social discomfort, and other said small space, dirty bathrooms, and conflicting beliefs. For question 21, it was about improving the dorms for mindfulness. 20% 20% said soundproofing, 20% said larger spaces, less personal bathrooms, 15% said more quieter zones, more spiritual, 10% said better roommate policies or less weed. For question 22 was, do you think the university should provide more designated sacred or quiet spaces for students? Why or why not? 90% said yes, overwhelming support for more designated calm areas. And the reason was promoting inclusivity, reflection, religious expression, and peace. And the common theme was a shared need for emotional and spiritual well-being. The remaining 10% were ambiguous and it didn't matter to them.
After collecting data, we categorized freshmen and the seniors between two groups, and we divided them up between if they identified as religious or spiritual, and non-religious. We observed that the 5 freshmen who were residents described their dorm to be sacred, and the 1 freshman who was a non-resident found that their outdoor space, which was the Merla Castle, was their sacred space. To summarize what I just said, the freshmen who were residents found their dorm to be a sacred space, rather than the 1 freshman who was non-religious found their outdoor space to be sacred. Now for the seniors, there are about 8 seniors. 6 of them were a part of the religious and spiritual group. 1, in fact, was a non-resident, while the remainder 5 were residents. And then for the non-religious group, there were about 2 non-religious students, and they both were residents. And as you can see, most seniors resulted to their outdoor spaces as a sacred space before their dorm. The data, we found that there was no difference between freshmen and seniors finding their dorm sacred, because in fact both years, which was whether it was freshmen and seniors, found their dorms to be a sacred space when they were residents.
The responses collected reveal meaningful patterns in how college students perceive and interact with their dorm environments, particularly in relation to comfort, sacredness, and emotional well-being. As stated before, a significant majority, 65% of the participants, reported personalizing their dorms through decorations, photos, or ritualized habits such as stretching or listening to music. This suggests that many students engage in intentional acts of personalization to create a sense of belonging and sanctuary within their living space. When asked whether non-religious spaces could be considered, 70% of respondents agreed, emphasizing the importance of personal meaning and intentionality over traditional religious functions. Students who supported this view often cited dorms, libraries, and gyms as spaces that offer solitude, reflection, or emotional connection. This points to a broader redefinition of sacredness that transcends religious boundaries, particularly in diverse academic communities. In context, it means that any space can be sacred. So, interestingly enough, only 60% of the participants said religion did not influence how they used their dorms, while 25% stated it did, using their dorm rooms for prayer or spiritual practices. This divide illustrates the degrees to which personal faith intersects with academic life and basically suggests the need for more flexible, inclusive environments that accommodate for both secular and spiritual uses of space. Common barriers to comfort and mindfulness in dorms were noise, lack of privacy, and tension with roommates, something that I've had to deal with in the past. This highlights the social and structural challenges that can inhibit well-being. In response, over half of the students suggested improvements like soundproofing, larger rooms, and more private or reflective spaces. Most notably, 90% supported the university providing more designated quiet or sacred spaces on campus. This shows a widespread desire for structured environments that promote inner peace, mindfulness, and belonging. I know that that's something that I would want. Overall, the data shows a strong consensus around the importance of emotional and spatial agency in college life. While students differed in their use of the dorms for spiritual or religious practices, they overwhelmingly agreed that campus spaces should support comfort, self-expression, and mental health. These findings suggest that universities should support and prioritize the development of flexible, inclusive spaces that honor both personal and ritual and communal needs. As for our conclusion, overall, students revealed their dorms and campus spaces as deeply personal and sacred. While their experiences varied, most seek comfort, mindfulness, and a sense of belonging in these spaces. The findings suggest that universities, like I said, should prioritize creating inclusive, peaceful areas that support both personal reflection and diverse student needs. Today, we're going to explore how students' relationship with their dorms connects with the lecture, specifically week 1, What is Sacred, and how it connects to sacredness, place, and ritual, drawing on Marc Augé's theory of place and non-place, and Fraser's description of sacred place, and the themes from all our class readings. So first of all, I want to say that Marc Augé's theory of place and non-place, according to Augé, a place is a space full of meaning, memory, and human connection where identity is built and shared. A non-place, on the other hand, is a space of transience, anonymity, and functionality. These include places like airports, highways, or in this case, a college dorm room before it's been lived in. Augé writes that a place is a symbolic universe, while a non-place lacks that symbolic structure. But the thing that's really fascinating about the students' responses is that they don't passively accept the dorm as a non-space. Instead, they reshape it. They do this through small acts of ritual and decoration. Students redefine their living space, infusing it with emotional weight and symbolic value. They move from disorientation to orientation, from anonymity to identity, and we can see this in all of their responses. A powerful comparison can be made with Fraser's description of Nemi. He writes of a sunset blazing over the Alban Hills, church bells ringing, and the fading light bathing Rome in spiritual gold. He describes how sound and landscape create a moment that is both sacred and unforgettable. In the same way, for students, a simple act like lighting a candle, putting up photos, or playing music can transform the dorm from a sterile box into a space of peace and longing. The ritual makes the space meaningful. Once again, this connects to our questions with people talking about personalization and ritualizing their rooms in an effort to make it more sacred and more comfortable to them. And this is definitely something we both can relate to, especially as freshmen coming into the dorms. So that brings us to the next key idea: ritual as a way of retrieving the sacred. From all the readings that we've done and the readings in week 1, we understand that rituals are not just religious acts, but are symbolic behaviors embedded in the culture, like oaths, ceremonies, graduation, and even holiday shopping. Rituals exist to give meanings to experience, and in a fast-paced, super modern environment like college, where spaces are temporary, transitions are constant, and students often feel disconnected, ritual becomes essential. I can actually give an example of that. So in one of the responses, one student wrote that even folding their laundry and arranging stuffed animals was a ritual that made them feel grounded. And as simple as it may seem to people, I think that anything can be a ritual, and that is a perfect example of that. Another mentioned using their dorm for a Bible study. And that's obviously more of a ritual that is in line with religious beliefs, while others sought peace through nature walks or gym routines. So nature walks and gym routine are ritual to them. It's considered sacred to them and very important. These rituals are not trivial. They are how students reclaim orientation, how they insert symbolic order into what Auger would call an overstimulated world of excess information and transit. These are micro acts of sacredness. They are ways of slowing down time and anchoring the self. What's more, when students were asked whether dorms, libraries, or gyms could be considered sacred, over 70% of them said yes. Many believe that sacredness is not limited to traditional religious structures. Rather, sacredness can exist anywhere if the space supports reflection, safety, or personal growth. Others also, like we said earlier in the presentation, considered a space as sacred if it was quiet. This belief aligns with how anthropologists view sacred spaces today, not as something fixed or institutional, but as something people make through use, memory, and emotion. One student compared their dorm to a church, that it offered them solitude, while another said their gym became sacred because it was a place of transformation and healing. And I think that is the same for a lot of people. A sacred space is the intent that we put behind it, and it does not have to be religious, which is something that you will see in all of the responses, and not all of them, but a lot of the responses. Even the barriers students described, like noise, roommate tension, or lack of privacy, can be viewed through this lens. These obstacles disrupt the process of placemaking. They interfere with the ritual of grounding, and this is where institutions have a role to play. When the students were asked if universities should provide more sacred or quiet places, 90% said yes. Not because they wanted religion imposed necessarily, but because they craved reflection, peace, and emotional safety. This brings us to the idea of collective ritual and institutional sacredness. Museums, as the lecturer mentioned, are one such example. They preserve shared identity through objects and memory. But campuses too can become sacred landscapes if it's designed with intention. Like I said, it's all about the intention behind it. Study halls, garden courtyards, meditation rooms, they aren't just amenities. They're modern rituals of care. They symbolize that the institution values more than academic output. It values the students' being, their well-being, that is. So, in conclusion, the finding shows that students are not just living in their dorms. They're inhabiting them. They're building rituals, creating identity, and making sacred what might otherwise be overlooked. Dorm rooms become modern shrines, gyms become temples of healings, cafes become sacred through community. In a time when many traditional markers of the sacred are fading, students are retrieving this sacredness through everyday acts. They're reminding us that a place is not defined by structure, but is instead defined by meaning. What's sacred to them may not be sacred to you, but it's the intent behind the place. It is what it means. So whether it's a church on a hill or a Polaroid wall in a dorm room, sacredness still lives quietly, personally, and powerfully. Sacredness is defined differently for everybody. And anything can be sacred so long as we make it so. And after doing this project, I realized how important sacredness is. It's a powerful reminder that sacredness is not always defined by architecture or tradition, that it can be found in the small intentional acts of everyday life. For college students, sacred spaces might not be cathedral, even though this is a Catholic school, but a quiet moment in a dorm room, a walk through nature, a walk through founders, a walk to the library, a conversation in the library. What unites all these examples is the feelings of safety, presence, and emotional resonance they evoke. It is also important to recognize that this desire for sacredness is not just personal, but it's collective. The overwhelming call for universities to provide more designated quiet or sacred spaces reveals a shared yearning for intentionality in campus design. These aren't just requests for nicer buildings. They're requests for environments that nurture the soul, support mental health, and overall validate the full human experience.
Thank you for listening to us. This is our cited work, and here we listed out all of the pictures we used, which you can click and see. The sites are from the cited sites that are interlinked. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We hope you enjoyed our research topic, and thank you.
Yes, this was a very informative and productive research, and it was a great project to do as the last presentation before we leave this campus, and it was very reflective of my time on campus and learning about other people's view of sacredness on campus and other spaces was very interesting and something that I truly appreciated.